last Friday of each month, where we host an Iraqi entrepreneur, business leader, and visionaries to share their experience and knowledge about their respective industries, and it will be a learning experience for all of us. This month, we're focusing on an interesting topic, which is e-commerce in Iraq, which has attracted a lot of interest from both investors and uh, customers, and has attracted a lot of investments in the recent years. We're talking about 6 figures, 7 figures. To understand more about the industry and to understand more about the sector in itself, we're hosting Ahmed Al Kiremli, the founder of Orisdi, one of Iraq's biggest e-commerce platforms. Ahmed is a serial entrepreneur, business and growth mentor, and a best-selling author with his book, Efficientpreneur. I want to welcome Ahmed to our live.
Hi, Ahmed. How
Welcome,
are you
Ahmed, and
doing?
thank you
Thanks
for
for
joining
hosting
us.
me. Thanks for hosting me. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. So, as a start, I would like for the audience to know more about you. If you can please tell us more about yourself and how you come to start your own business.
I'm the founder and CEO of Orisdi. Orisdi is a vertically integrated e-commerce store. I'm also a serial entrepreneur, built several businesses in many different industries previously, offline and online. I'm a business mentor as well, worked with many business owners and entrepreneurs to help them scale their businesses. And I'm also an author. I wrote a book called The Efficientpreneur, and it hit #1 international bestseller in 5 different Amazon stores at the first week of its launch. So that's a very short, long brief about me.
Thank you. Ahmed, there's a lot of talk about e-commerce and what is it about, but could you explain more about what is e-commerce? What differentiates it from other types of sectors and other types of businesses?
It's actually electronic commerce. It's self-explanatory. So like trading online. So you have some products and you sell it online, and there are many different models. It could be an e-commerce store. It could be the other model is like drop shipping from outside or internally. It could be also a platform where sellers can display their items on the store and sell it like as a platform. So there are multiple different business model for e-commerce, but the whole concept is about selling products online.
Thank you. And so, with that concept, of course, any industry has its own benefits, its own advantages and disadvantages. What attracted you most to getting involved in the e-commerce sector in Iraq, especially at a time where there wasn't a lot of that kind of businesses?
Actually, I've been mentoring many other different entrepreneurs and business all over the world through my mentoring programs online. And so most of them tech startups. So with that experience, I was always looking at Iraq as my own country and seeing there is a gap in that. So said, why not like start something like that and try to add value to people by bringing them convenience and shipping to them products to their doorstep and with competitive prices and it's all about customer experience and improving the customer experience by adding value to customers in Iraq. So I saw the gap and I decided that why not jump into that. And usually e-commerce is basically the start, broad e-commerce, when you have different products, lots of products, usually it's the start of the ecosystem in any country. So all countries start by broad e-commerce and then more niche websites happens. Like example, US started with Amazon, eBay, and then like more niche sites focused on certain categories started to launch. Same with, let's say, the UAE started with Souk.com, which got acquired by Amazon, and then Noon, and then more niche sites focused on a specific category. So always the ecosystem in any country starts with a specific, with the broad e-commerce, and then it niched down into more specialized categories, and then to the rest of the industries, which it could be food delivery, other tech industries, SaaS, and the rest of software and big data, and the rest of like tech ecosystem startups.
So you found Iraq a fertile ground for such a business, and was that when you look at it at the time, was it just like there wasn't a platform like that, or they weren't doing it efficiently, or that the ground was there, the tools were there, it just needed someone to get involved in it?
There were like two players before us, and I reached out. Actually, I did some research and I reached out to one of them, and I tried to invest in that player and maybe partner, but it didn't happen. So we notified them and we started our own store. But like we started with a very different, unique perspective. Like we are the first to kind of start a brand with a brand identity. The rest of like previous players, they were not like properly branded. But then after we started in a while, they started seeing what we are doing with the brand, and they improved their branding and marketing in general. Also, we are the first to focus on customer experience, first to focus on user experience, and as well, like to offer 48 hours return and exchange policy with zero shipping fees. So we scaled really fast. Like in the first year, we did really good in terms of in comparison with like years of our competitors. And yeah, we established our name in the market in that way. Yeah.
Talking about establishing a name in the market, could you tell us how did you start the company? How did you start Orisdi?
Our strategy was focused on digital marketing only. Like many people or investors advised us to kind of focus offline as well, like on billboards, TV, and the rest of the stuff. But like I was very clear that our strategy is focused only on digital marketing, and I have deep knowledge in that since 2009. Worked with many mentors, read over 700 books, and I've been seeing the future in the US and in the UAE, and I knew that's gonna come in Iraq. It's just a matter of time. It's like when we've seen 6-7 years ago in Iraq, like the boom of the malls. It's also I've seen that, like how it started in the US and in the UAE, and then it came to Iraq. So e-commerce and the digital space is the same thing. It's just a matter of time before it becomes the main norm. So yeah, that's how we started, and our strategy was focused on that mainly. So we developed a really good formula of scale and based on digital marketing and paid ads, and until now it's really doing well for us. Yeah.
So your view or your experience in outside of Iraq and you being exposed to those platforms there, did that give you an advantage in starting Orisdi in a more efficient way?
Definitely, because like more experience of seeing what works, what it didn't work in different markets. Also, I built so many different services and websites before, dealt with developers, with like design, branding. So I have a very long, wide experience with many different industries. Plus, I've seen the international or regional players, how they scaled. So definitely that helped me be more efficient, like with Orisdi. And we are until now the most efficient player in terms of units of economics. We are not the biggest, but we are the most efficient player in terms of units of economics. So if we have enough capital, we can really be the Amazon of Iraq.
Was there anything that surprised you when you came to the business in Iraq that was different than what you expected that was unique to Iraq, something that wasn't as the typical that was in other countries?
Honestly, the investment scene, like the investors' mindset and the investment scene in general, like it is frustrating in Iraq. Like it's developed last 2 or 3 years a lot. It's much better now. More investors, more rounds, bigger tickets. Some regional VCs are entering, which is very positive for the ecosystem. But the movement is very slow. The mindset of the Iraqi investors, like still it's a trading mindset. They tell you, well, I give you this X amount, and how much I'm gonna get it in 6 months. This mindset is different, and it doesn't work with startups. Startups from the name of it, it's a startup. The difference between a startup and a normal business, startup needs capital to be, and usually they start with a loss, to be able to revolutionary scale, like, revolutionarily scale fast. Like, and in order to scale fast as a startup, you need capital, because you're going to burn this capital in marketing and in this fast speed of expansion. And the mindset in Iraq is way far from that. Even with lots of people who have lots of money and big capital in Iraq, they're still thinking traditionally, and they invest in, like, traditional assets like real estate or other assets classes. The future, the present and the future is online, and this is gonna change, but we need to change it quickly. So sometimes it's a problem when you are ahead of your time, to explain and educate investors and some players. So yeah, that's basically the most challenge that we faced. However, most people think that the challenge is logistics, or the challenge is the customers are not paying online. But the main challenge is basically access to capital.
Do you think that's because it's a new concept to the country, where it was a socialist country up until the 2003, and until now we didn't have much of the investment scene? Do you think it's just that it needs more time, or that changes are happening currently compared to what they were before?
I think in Iraq there was no normal process of, like, creating the corporate world, because in the US or somewhere else, the corporations are coming from startups. Like, they all start as startups, and then they raise different series of investments and rounds, and then they go public to the publics, they do an IPO to go public in the public stock market, and then they become the big giant corporations that we know. And in Iraq, we didn't have that, and so people don't get it. Investors don't get it. And what's really frustrating more is, like, some investors are investing in, let's say, the US stock market in some of those companies. And some of those companies are still startups, like they are 5 years old or 10 years old, and they are losing money. So they're like Uber or Asana or Monday.com, they are all losing hundreds and millions of dollars. So you see some investors in Iraq invest in those companies, regardless how much they are losing hundreds of millions of dollars, some of them in billions. But they don't invest in a startup in Iraq that loses $100,000 a year. So that's, honestly, it's very strange and frustrating. And yeah, I mean,
What do you think that
that's the
is?
situation.
Do you have any idea of why that is? Why do they have that behavior?
I think there is still the trust is not there. There is a like this disconnect. We need to work more on educating the investors and the ecosystems, because some of those small startups, if it's really well funded properly, it can be the biggest company in the country, like bigger than, let's say, the big telecommunication companies in the country. But, like, I don't understand why some investors don't see it. And also another issue is some of the Iraqi investors with big companies, without mentioning names, they have invested in many regional players or startups that came to Iraq or didn't come to Iraq, but they didn't invest in the Iraqi local startups, which some of them are competing with those regional players. So that's another strange thing. So yeah, I mean, the investment game, I always say it's like a jealousy game. So the more VCs invest in Iraq, the more regional VCs will get jealous and be curious of what's going on in Iraq. Because I believe Iraq, with the big population of 40 to 42 million people, can be the fourth country after the big three countries in terms of the startup ecosystem, which is, let's say, UAE, Saudi, Egypt. Iraq can come after them because of the power of the purchasing power and the population. So many of those startups, they've been growing in the region the last 5 years or 10 years they need new markets in the region, and Iraq is a very good nominee for that. And also the legislations, the government laws, investment laws needs to be improved. Like example, a couple of years ago, they passed a law in the parliament that international investors cannot invest more than 49%. That's something that's gonna, delay the process of proper investment to Iraq, because investors, they want to protect their assets and they want to have control. Yeah.
And that prevents them from having the control, of course.
One of the excuses, I mean, we found solutions around that, like establishing holding companies outside and make the holding company owns the Iraqi company. And we've done lots of that. And entrepreneurs in Iraq always pivot, and they are very smart to deal with disasters and try to find solutions. But like, still, it's a long way. There is a big progress last 2-3 years, but it's slow. Like, we need to really move fast. And that is not going to happen without regional investors and without the local Iraqi investors that they have capital in Iraq to start investing in the Iraqi startups.
Despite all the difficulties in terms of investments and investor mindset in Iraq, Orisdi has been successful in raising multiple rounds of investment. What makes the platform attractive to investors, and why do you think that is?
Actually, we've been working. Oh, we have a pitch deck. We have financials. We have a very good units of economics. We are post-revenue. Most investors in the world, the most startups in the world, investors invest in them when it's an idea. We've been post-revenue from day one in Orisdi. So we brought the first investments after 3 months, which is the fastest probably investment in Iraq. In terms of life of the company. So we are one of the best 3 or 5 startups in Iraq. Very investable. We have big potential, but still the investment amounts that we brought it's honestly very small in comparison with the vision and what we want to achieve and what this business as a broad e-commerce is required. Most of it is from angel investors with a very small, tickets. However, we are one of the, best startups that managed to raise capital, which is a good thing for the ecosystem and for smaller startups. Because now the path for smaller startups who need, say, $500,000 or even to $1 million, it's way easier than before. But we are playing on a bigger level. And that bigger level is still not yet there in terms of investment in Iraq.
You're basically leading the way in the terms of investment in Iraq, which is make it easier for other startups to raise capital. Comparatively.
Hopefully, we are building the ecosystem on our shoulders to make it easier for the people after us. And they can learn from our mistakes, from our challenges, and we are happy also to help anyone who needs any support to guide them through some of the processes so they can make it more efficiently.
One of the partnerships that I was more interested in was your partnership with Sharqiyya TV. And the impact you expected from that, because you talked about focusing more on the digital side, and Sharqiyya TV is one of the biggest networks in the country. How could you talk more about that? How it came to be, and what's the expectation from it?
Yeah, it's actually a privilege for us to be for sure. It's the biggest TV in Iraq in terms of number of users. I think they have about 35% of the viewership in Iraq. As a channel, and it's their first investment in a startup, in a tech startup. So it's a privilege for us, and it gave us also a push with their ads on TV to appeal to a different demographics or viewers in Iraq or customers in Iraq. So it's a privilege to us, and we learned from the experience a lot, and it's a good step for the rest of the startups as well, and the rest of the big companies in Iraq to invest in startups. So Sharqiyya and many other players like Al Group as well invested with us. They are the owners of the station, and we are the first startup that they invest in as well, which is also a privilege to us. So that's all positive signs for the ecosystem in general and the startups in Iraq.
Okay. Of course, the industry has changed from its beginning to now, and a lot of, especially in the startup and the ecosystem of startups in Iraq, we've seen, as we're documenting it, we've seen a lot of development. How do you see the development of the e-commerce sector from the time you started Orisdi to now? Of course, there's still challenges, but if you can elaborate more on that.
Actually, more players enter the market, so it became more competitive. Some players exit the market because it's not an easy sector. It's the most difficult sector in the tech industry in general, tech ecosystem. So some bigger tickets of investments happened. New investors entered. So the whole thing is changing. You know, it's improving and evolving as any new tech startups in the world. The tech startup in Iraq is still young, and it's still learning and evolving with time.
Is there any specific things that you saw improvements of in the sector?
Competition is good for to improve the services, improve the brands, provide better services for the customers, educate more the users and customers. Like many people were not in Iraq how to add to cart and to checkout on the websites. They used to be like, you know, ordering from pages online on social media, on Facebook or Instagram. They send a picture for the product, and the seller, you know, send them the product. Now it's more evolved into the more professional way of e-commerce, which is like people download an app or go to the website, add products to and check out. Same for the investment. It's also evolved, like bigger ticket sizes, more investment, more investors, created more jobs for the economy. I believe that people in Iraq shift their mindset from the public sector to the private sector, because the future is in the private sector to save the country, not in the public sector. Public sector is not really adding value in terms, like in comparison with the investments that's happening in terms of salaries in the public sector, while the private sector is adding way more value. And the government really needs to focus on that too, and people need to change their mindset to focus on, you know, working in the private sector, learn more. You know, so the private sector is creating more jobs, and it's very healthy for the economy in general.
It's becoming a new. They have to change their mindset because of the years that the only focus was on the government being as the main employer. We're talking about maybe back when the country was started up until the economic collapse of 2014, maybe.
Yeah, I mean the norm in Iraq, like most people think, like, well, I want to get a job at the public sector because there is more security and pension in it, and it's a very laid back, lazy thinking. Sorry to say that. Like, you know, this is the socialism thinking. Like, you know, I'm gonna depend on the government, and the government gonna take care of me. But at a certain point, the government cannot take care of itself, and it happens a couple of years ago or a year ago when the oil prices went down, with the country that 99% of the country income is oil dependent. So we need to diversify the economy, and the public sector is a solution for that, and change this mindset of, like, you know, I gotta go to the public sector to get X salary. So when before I die at 65, I get X pension. You know, in the you know, we need to push entrepreneurship. Like, you need to depend on yourself, or work in the private sector and learn new skills, and maybe you get better salaries than the public sector. And maybe that will motivate you to learn the process and start your own business, and depend on yourself, and add more value and create jobs for the economy. Because at the end of the day, entrepreneurs are the ones who are creating the jobs, not the employees. So we need more entrepreneurs in the country to stimulate the private sector and to create more jobs and to develop the economy and to diversify the economy in general.
Well put, very well put. I think the investment, if they see that we're going to go for the public sector as 20 years from now, I can get a pension, that will be an investment for me. But it would be better, of course, to also check the other side, the private sector side, to invest in yourself, maybe in your skills and your knowledge.
Yeah, the highest return on investment is to invest in yourself. And now you don't need a traditional education or like the public sector job to educate yourself. You can learn online on YouTube, you can learn from mentors, you can learn from courses or coaches without going to school, especially if you want to become a marketer or an entrepreneur. If you want to be a doctor or an engineer, go to traditional education and learn. But now you can really learn efficiently, and the level field is very level. Like you can compete in your room anywhere in Iraq with anyone who's sitting in the US or sitting in any developed country in the world. So it's not like before. You used to have walls and you need to travel to do trades and do stuff. Now the internet have leveled the field, so you can really lead and build a global company from your basement at home. If you have a SaaS software, if you have something like that, you can be on NASDAQ public while building this company from Iraq. But there is a process for that. So I really encourage young entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs in general to focus on the tech industry, because the scalable tech is way faster than the traditional businesses.
We will come back to the ways they can get the knowledge from that, and I think you have your own business club that they can join. We will talk about that later. So in terms of, we're talking about the local investors, the local money that's not quite up to the modern standard. What do you think of, have you seen any international interest in the e-commerce sector in Iraq, especially in acquisitions, investments?
Yeah, actually, we negotiated few acquisitions, M&A, like from outside, and it was close to happen. And also we discussed with lots of local players M&A opportunities, because I honestly believe that this sector is required cooperation between the competitors. So if 2 or 3 different players join forces, I believe that they can make a bigger impact, add better value for the customers, because it's not an easy journey to be in broad e-commerce, and cooperation is very, very important. But so I encourage other startups or competitors to be more open-minded to that. Some of them at certain stages were no, I can do this alone, but with time they're realizing how challenging is the path, and lack of access to capital makes it more challenging. So cooperation will make it easier for everyone, will make it even easier for investors to join. So I'm always a big believer in that, and pushing for that.
What are the countries that you see more interest in Iraq, or is the companies of that country, of that region, focusing more on Iraq? Is it, let's say, the wider Middle East, or we're talking about European countries? Because we've seen some investments from European and American countries in the delivery sector. Do you see any of that here in the e-commerce sector?
I mean, some investments happen from funds in the US, Europe. Also, recent one with Belly happened. One of their VCs, I think, from China, Novo. But most of them coming from the region, like MENA region investors, with us. Some Innovest invested with us, and some other investors invested in other startups also from the region. So mainly from the MENA region, but some other regions as well, interested in Iraq, and NGOs also opening the door for that, because NGOs mostly comes from the US or Europe, and they are trying to support startups in Iraq and give grants and open the door for international investors.
I want to come back to the business side of Orisdi, or the customer side more specifically. Iraq has a high digital literacy and low financial inclusion rates, and that affected many tech startups especially, and I want to understand how that affects the e-commerce sector. And for our viewers, digital literacy is the inability to use digital tools, computers, laptops, mobile phones in the way they're intended. And financial inclusion is where you don't have the ability to purchase online or do payments online or receive payments online, which Iraq is unfortunately one of the lowest countries in the region in terms of that.
Yeah, I think it's a process that needs time. Like it definitely affects the payment and people like habits to buy online, because it's not yet there in Iraq. Like we've seen more development in the banking sector in the last 2-3 years. More people have credit cards, debit cards, good things from the government for like to transfer the salaries to bank accounts, so public sector employees can withdraw it from ATMs. But most of those public sector employees, they just use the cards or the debit card just to withdraw their salaries, but they are not using it to buy products online. But I think with time, the habits will start developing, that the trust. It's a process that takes time. It happens the same in the US, same also in the UAE. People like at the beginning were not trusting to buy, only cash on delivery to see the products and to know the merchant. But time and time, we see an increase in the transactions online, and I think it's going to continue to improve. It's a process that will continue to improve with time, but it's required also more push from the government, from private sector, from the banking industry to make POS machines in the shops available to show how easy the customer experience will be when people pay online or pay via Apple Pay or other online mediums. And with that, we will see an increase of online transactions as e-commerce players in the market.
So we can understand that we're going on a positive trend in that regard.
Definitely.
Talking about the industry as a whole, you talked about some cooperation when you wanted to start Orisdi and reached out to some e-commerce platforms in Iraq. And now that you have Orisdi and there's more than 5 big platforms working in Iraq in the sector, do you have any cooperations between these companies to advance the sector as a whole, advance the industry as a whole? Or is it
As
just
I
that everyone
mentioned,
works on their special on their corner?
like in this interview, we in Orisdi, we are the biggest believer in the region, in the country in cooperation, and we are the most who have tried with other players to cooperate and to try to do an M&A or do a solution together, because we believe that cooperation is the way to go. But nothing honestly like actual happened, but it might happen in the near future. Very, very likely to happen. But when, I don't know. But like currently, I don't see cooperation between the e-commerce players themselves, like in general. But like there are some cooperation, let's say, with an e-commerce player and a payment provider, let's say, as some companies in Iraq, like Switch cooperating with some e-commerce players, or like the other one, which they provide buy now, pay later as well. Zod Pay cooperate with
Okay.
some, yeah. But like e-commerce with e-commerce, actual cooperation until now, I don't see any of that. I didn't see any of that. Yeah.
Hopefully, we can see that in the future, as you said. That would be helpful for the industry as a whole. Uh, so you're already, as I understood from you, is very open to cooperation, very open platform, very open to even advising startups and helping the industry. Is Orisdi open for investment now, and how can people reach out or investors reach out for you?
Yeah, sure. They can email me at ak@orisdi.com, and we can, start the discussion, discuss maybe the pitch deck, see the size of investment. We are open for investment because we are very close from the break-even point, and we need to raise more capital, and we are open to small and big tickets to try to collect a certain round and close a new round. So we are open to that.
Okay. Well, questions are done. Thank you so much for being cooperative and for the great answers. We're now taking some questions from the chat box from our viewers. Um, the question from Omar says, "Hi, why the e-commerce websites didn't use an affiliate service in Iraq?"
Actually, we are working on one. Like we are working on, to provide very shortly. We will have this service, so you can kind of advertise certain products that we have, and if it's sold through your link, then you get a commission for that. But there are marketplaces in Iraq where there are marketplaces in Iraq where you can display this in those websites and you sell from them. But the affiliate is different. I understand what he means by that.
Another question is, I think we also covered that. Maybe if you have something more to add to it. Why Amazon didn't start its operation in Iraq, even using another company by another name to penetrate the market?
Actually, I mean, I believe e-commerce Amazon have more priority in a more established countries, probably more before Iraq to expand to, which like they focus first on UAE, Saudi, Egypt, and then maybe other countries. So there is a big potential for Iraq as a big
I think there was a technical issue from Mr. Ahmed's side. We will wait a little bit until his network comes back. Yeah. Welcome back, Mr. Ahmed.
Yeah. Sorry, it disconnected. I don't know why. Yeah. Shall I complete the answer?
Yeah, please continue.
Yeah, so I think Amazon is focused first on expanding, UAE, Saudi, Egypt, and Iraq is a big potential to be one of the next markets. But maybe now they have more priorities to open maybe in Bahrain or some other countries, which is more established and easier for them to roll the operation, bring their staff. But Iraq, as I said, is a big potential, 42 million population. And it would be also a dream exit for any of the startups in Iraq if maybe Amazon acquire one of the local players and then start the operations in Iraq.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Ahmed. Lastly, I want to understand how people can join your business club. If they have any questions for you, how they can reach out for you.
Yeah, I mean, they just can go to ahmedalkiremli.com and they can go to the products page and they can see, more details about that if they need any help. Or they can just reach me on my email at ak@orisdi.com or ahmed@ahmedalkiremli.com.
Thank you, Mr. Ahmed. If you have any last comments you want to share.
Really appreciate the interview and what you are doing for the ecosystem in Iraq. You are producing really great content, and that's benefiting a lot of entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs in Iraq as well. Really, I encourage you to continue what you are doing, and I really appreciate this interview. And as I said, I hope that we all can cooperate and help the ecosystem in Iraq and build more entrepreneurs in Iraq, develop the private sector, because it's the way to go to develop the economy in general in Iraq. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your kind words, and I want to thank you again for joining us and sharing with us your great knowledge and experience. And for sure, we're all trying to advance the tech sector and the entrepreneur sector in Iraq. And thank you so much, Mr. Ahmed, and have a great night.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And if you have any questions, any extra questions, you can put it in the comment section, and we will try to answer that as soon as possible. Thank you so much. Have a good time.